You're listening to Twins Takes, the Minnesota Twins podcast.
Play ball!
And welcome to Twins Takes. I'm Twins Central, joined by Twins insider Falvey's Mattress and a very special guest, Aaron Rupar. Aaron, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to chat with some of my favorite Twins Twitter accounts, and I'm honored to join the show.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time out to join us. I'm sure if you're on Twitter, like most of our listeners are, you've seen Aaron, whether it's about baseball or not. But Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into Twins baseball and maybe some of your favorite Twins memories?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up a Twins fan from Forest Lake, which is obviously where Matt Wallner is from as well. And actually, I played pickup ball with Matt before anybody really knew who he was. I was like the oldest guy playing. I was in my 20s, and I think Matt must have been like 13 or so. My brother was kind of friends with him or had mutual friends. So I do remember Big Matt from Belts Park basketball up in Forest Lake when we were all younger. But grew up a Twins fan, and one of my favorite Twins memories was for my 8th birthday. That was right during the 1991 World Series, and my dad that day was like, hey, we got to go get your birthday present. It's down in Minneapolis. And I was like, cool, not really knowing what to expect. So we turn off on Washington Avenue, and he drives past the Metrodome toward where the Target Center is. And he tells me that we're going to Sesame Street Live. And I was young enough where I was still like pretty pumped about that. I was like, oh, that's cool, nice. But then at a certain point, he turned the car back around and started driving toward the Dome and told me that he had tickets to Game 2 of the World Series. So I was at Game 2, which was, of course, the Kent Hrbek, Ron Gant game, and Scott Leus hit a late home run to kind of seal it for the Twins. So I don't think anything will really top that. But then, I lived in D.C. for a few years, so I strayed a little bit, became kind of a Nationals fan. Of course, they won the 2019 World Series while I was living out there, which was a lot of fun. But moved back here during COVID, and now I have the season pass, and I've been going to way too many Twins games since 2022. It's become kind of like one of my favorite sort of like downtime or relaxation exercises. Although I guess with the exception of 2023, it's been more stressful than relaxing in terms of the results. But I'm just a hopeless baseball fan. Love it. And, Twins are my team as long as I'm living here. And of course, they're the team that I grew up watching.
Yeah, that's my dad grew up going to those games as well. So I've heard a lot of those similar stories that you just shared. Unfortunately for me, Falvey's Mattress and Insider, we've yet to see a World Series, and it doesn't look like one's on the cusp soon, but at least we did have that 2023 season. Speaking of Falvey's Mattress and Insider, how are you guys doing?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to have Aaron on here. And Aaron, I do have a question. Could 13-year-old Matt Wallner hit high fastballs at that point, or was that already a hole in his game?
Well, so the funny thing is, I remember him. I just remember Matt, who was like a big, tall kid. But I didn't think anything about it at the time at all because, my recollection is that he's quite a bit younger than I am, but that he was kind of a late bloomer in terms of he won Mr. Baseball as a senior, but I don't think anybody really thought that much of him as an athlete, before his last couple of years in high school. And my brother still kind of jokes that for as, obviously as excellent as he is at baseball, that he wasn't much of a basketball player. But it's just one of those things. I've kind of like a vague memory of Matt at Belts Park because we had kind of like a regular group of guys who would play pickup. And so it's funny to reflect on that all these years later, with him obviously being an MLB player, which I never would have foreseen for a second back then.
That sounds like a Falvey draft pick. Any comments on that, Falvey's Mattress?
I have no comments on that. I would just like to say I'm doing great. Thank you, Aaron, for joining us. And I'm going to ask, do we have any news recently?
Breaking news.
Well, I got some bad news for you.
Extra. Good news, everyone.
It's time for the news.
Well, the news for the Twins at this point in time is a mixed bag. They went 2-1 up in Toronto, but there was some bad that possibly outweighed the good. Royce Lewis landed back on the injured list. I believe this is his 9th trip in his career, if I recall that stat correctly. Ryan Kreidler was the call-up, but obviously the bigger news is the Royce Lewis injury. Sounds like it should be minimal, but we know with Royce, minimal doesn't always mean minimal. What do you guys think this means for the Twins? Are we going to see a lot more Tristan Gray?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll just kind of be a platoon between Kreidler and Gray at third base. You know, when we're facing a lefty, Kreidler will play. When we're facing a righty, Gray will play. And I mean, I've got to say, Tristan Gray has looked absolutely phenomenal so far. He's had a few very, very clutch hits, another 3-run home run in the Toronto series that catapulted us to a series win. So not too disappointed seeing him get more play in the lineup.
Yeah, I just wanted to interject that watching the game yesterday, as I mentioned, I used to be a Nationals fan, and seeing Max Scherzer in that state was kind of a bummer. Just remembering how dominant he was at his peak in Washington. But yeah, Gray got him for the three-run blast, and then I think Clemens hit one that probably is still yet to land up there in Toronto a bit later. But yeah, I mean, it was bittersweet. Obviously, it was great to see the Twins offense explode, and they've definitely had more thump in their lineup than I would have thought. Part of me still kind of wonders if it's small sample size. It seems like the home run hitting is going to come back down to earth a little bit. But Gray was a guy who I really, kind of barely knew who he was when he made the team. And I mean, there's no doubt when you hit a grand slam and a 3-run home run within, 6 or 7 game stretch that, the Twins are getting more than they could have bargained for there.
I totally echo what Aaron said about Gray, and I knew he had power in theory, but I'm surprised the game power is actually applying. I will say that they're currently platooning him with Ryan Kreidler at third base, and Kreidler does not have any. If Kreidler hits 2 home runs in the entire rest of the year, I think I'd be surprised.
If Kreidler has just 2 hits the rest of the year, I might be a little surprised. This is a guy that has under a 400 OPS in his career, so don't expect him to hit much at all. If the Twins' goal was just winning games, it would make a lot more sense to shift Kreidler over to shortstop when he's in the lineup and move Brooksley to third. Derek Shelton said that isn't in the plans, which I guess makes some sense because hopefully Royce Lewis is back here within the next 2 weeks. The other unfortunate injury news, Cody Lawyerson, who is off to a pretty good start. We saw him pick up a save last week, landed on the IL with an elbow issue or maybe a forearm issue. Whenever you see a word like that pop up, you worry about Tommy John. They haven't made anything like that official that I've seen. Andrew Morris was the call-up. This is a top 15 prospect for the Twins. He made his MLB debut Sunday against Toronto in that 8-2 victory. 3 innings pitched, allowed 1 run, 6 hits, walked none, struck out 2. He did get 11 whiffs, good for 24%. The velo, by far the hardest of any Twins reliever thus far. What were your guys' general takeaways on Andrew Morris's MLB debut?
Having watched this bullpen, I thought he did something like he was cheating because I saw a fastball that said 98. That was my main takeaway. I don't know how long he's going to be a long reliever or if he's going to transition very quickly to high leverage because his stuff is just far and away better than anyone else's in the bullpen. His fastball is hard. He has a couple breaking balls that he got strikeouts with, including his first career strikeout, which was obviously cool. He reminds me a little of Griffin Jacks a couple of years ago, who in 22, I believe, was in that like 3-inning role for a little bit, and then they needed relievers, so he very quickly worked his way up to that 7th inning guy. I don't know exactly what Morris's next steps are, but it was certainly fun to see a pitcher who looked like an MLB pitcher, not a junk baller.
Yeah, I was impressed with his stuff too, and a little bit, I don't know if confused is the right word, but the usage I thought was interesting, in kind of more of a long relief role, since his stuff seems to be of the sort where, I could certainly see him, maybe even being like a closer for this team, given kind of the other options that are out there. And I also thought it was notable that I believe his last inning in the game, he loaded the bases. And it was a point in the game where, Blue Jays were kind of 1 hit away from really making it a game again and basically bringing the tying run up. And that was one where, Shelton, he has seemed to have kind of the magic touch with mixing and matching some of these relievers. And in that case, I thought, when they left him in, he was already like 60 pitches deep. So I kind of expected when he came out there, for Morris to get lifted, but he left him in, he got out of the inning. And so I thought that was, kind of another example of how Shelton seems to be making the right moves when it comes to managing the relievers at his disposal.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what they do with Morris here because I think there's a decent shot that he's just the next starter up when one of the Twins' 5 big league starters inevitably gets hurt here in the next few weeks. But also we've seen how badly the bullpen needs reliable arms. If he's just good here, there is an argument to be made. Just, leave him in the pen, let him take on higher leverage situations. So it'll be interesting to see how Jeremy Zoll and Derek Shelton decide to handle that. Speaking of Derek Shelton and bullpen management, it was announced that Derek Shelton will be a part of the AL All-Star Game coaching staff. The Blue Jays staff is obviously the core, and then they're allowed to make one addition. Derek Shelton will fill that role. So a good honor for Shelton and the Twins for him to get that. If you guys have any comments regarding that.
I am just curious. I believe that sometimes when you get into the alternates for the All-Star game and some of the replacements, the coaches do have an impact, I believe. So there's a chance that the Twins have kind of a surprise All-Star because of that. And we'll see how the season plays out, obviously, because maybe they'll have a lot of All-Stars, maybe they won't have any, or maybe they'll only have one, but something to watch for.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, they're leading the American League, tied with Cleveland at 9-7. So if they continued on that path, they should have 3 or 4 All-Stars, but just a good honor for Shelton to get that recognition. Now we'll jump into our main topics here. We're a few weeks into the season. Twins are off to an unexpected 9-7 AL Central and AL leading start here. What are your guys' main takeaways through the first 2.5 weeks here?
I've definitely been pleasantly surprised. I mean, I traveled out to Baltimore for the first series and thought they looked more competent than I expected, because I was very much expecting like at least 90 losses or upward, based on this roster coming in to the season. And, I saw some of the Twins beat writers, Dan and Bobby, out there, and was a little bit surprised that they seemed to be more optimistic than I would have thought about this team. And, they look pretty miserable in that KC series, but, to at any point in the season be 2 games over 500 would have surprised me if you'd have told me that in March. Now, I mean, you mentioned that they're first in the AL, but I think they're like, 2 games out of being like basically 10th. I mean, all the teams are kind of so cloistered together. And as we talk here, in a few hours, we're going to have Bailey Ober versus Crochet, the ace for the Red Sox. So, this would be the type of game where the Twins can somehow find a way to win a game like that. We'll really start to take them more seriously. But, I usually kind of think of baseball seasons in like 20 game increments. So far, so good. But, again, I would just caution that the sample size remains quite small.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Aaron, the sample size has been super small, but I mean, it's not been expected. So it's been really, really fun to watch. I thought at this point we'd be 4 to 5 games under 500. So to go into this Boston series with an above 500 record and, like Twins Central said, leading the AL is unexpected and very fun. I would just like to point out just the number of base runners we've had on. It seems like every inning we're filling the bases and giving ourselves a good opportunity to put a crooked number up. And I don't know if that is a little different than teams past where we were trying more for just to hit the ball into the seats, or if it's just how the games have produced themselves for the first 16 games. But I did want to circle that out because I think it has been very just good to see our offensive approach. I know that Twins Insider has a namesake who is our hitting coach, so maybe he wants to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are definitely seeing Keith Beauregard in his prime. So you could call it conceivably prime Beauregard. But I know that, like Will mentioned, I don't know if it's that they're doing a ton different from what they've done in years past, but that I know that for one stat that's interesting is that they are 6th in batting average with runners in scoring position, which the last couple of years it's felt like they're maybe 29 or 30. But they are getting guys on. I think they have the most plate appearances with the bases loaded, the most hits, and the most RBI. Their offense is getting contributions up and down the lineup, which is a more sustainable way to do it than having one guy hit 3 home runs every game. So I like to think in the season in like 40 game increments. So it's probably too early to take anything away from it. But the unexpected success is always fun in any sport. Like, all the fun Vikings years have always been kind of unexpected. All the Timberwolves' early success with Ant a few years ago, kind of unexpected. Because when you're expected to be good, there's pressure, and people kind of fail in the pressure. But when it's a flash in the pan, it's always fun. You never know what's going to come next, and you kind of look forward to watching every day.
Speaking of small sample sizes and getting contributions up and down the lineup, Brooks Lee, a guy that many people, including people on this podcast, wanted bench just a few episodes ago in order to get Kalen Culpepper into the big big leagues, had a big series up north in Toronto, hit 2 home runs, had another extra base RBI hit against a lefty. His right-handed swing in particular really seems to be coming along. That would be really big for the Twins as a whole. Obviously, he has all this prospect pedigree, and a certain somebody on this podcast predicted him to hit 20 home runs. I would just like to note he is on pace to do that currently, so I may or may not have been a genius with that prediction.
With all due respect, he has 2 home runs. I mean, let's not start calling ourselves a genius yet, right?
He's got 2 more than Buxton. He's got 1 more than Keishel.
Another thing that stood out to me in this series was the starting pitching. Taj Bradley, who had been by far the ace of the staff, was still really good yesterday, but we saw him be good in a different way. He clearly didn't have his best stuff, didn't have his command working, but he still went 5 innings, allowing just 1 run. I believe he walked 4 guys, struck out 7. How encouraging was it to you guys to see Bradley, despite not having his A game, still putting together not a quality start, but still a really, really good start when the Twins needed it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty tough watch. He was fighting it. His body language wasn't great. You could tell he was frustrated. It just seemed like his mechanics were a little bit off. I know in the first inning, his fastball was down a couple miles an hour, but super encouraging. I mean, you're not going to have your best stuff every time you take the mound. So to see him take that leap and really, really struggle with his stuff and his command and still give us 5 innings with 7 strikeouts and 1 earned run, that's very telling to me of what kind of pitcher Taj Bradley can become with us. So I really, really like to see him like that.
I thought Taj's outing was an interesting contrast to SWR a couple days before, because he, of course, was sick. So he also did not have his best stuff. But when you don't have your best stuff, but you can still throw almost 100 miles an hour like Bradley can, you're kind of able to grit through it. When you don't have your best stuff and you only throw about 91, it's a lot harder to grit through it. And I think we saw that on display in these games. And it kind of is – it's why organizations will still prioritize stuff to an extent, even if sometimes it feels like it doesn't matter. It definitely can matter.
It is worth noting that SWR was not helped out by his right fielder. The previously talked about Matt Wallner had a bad read on a ball that was hit pretty hard to right field, but a ball that I think he would tell you that should have been caught. And the Twins do now return home to Target Field. And that brings us to another conversation that we want to talk about. I believe Aaron is maybe planning on attending a game or 2 against Boston this series. When you go to Target Field, you're on SeatGeek or whatever your ticket app of choice is. What section do you try to, find a seat in?
So I have the Twins Pass, which is just a standing room ticket for every game. And I found over the years that sometimes you have to get a little crafty, but usually there's open seats right along the third baseline, kind of behind the opposing dugout. So sometimes you have to kind of like be sneaky to get past the usher. Sometimes they just aren't really caring if you walk by them, but I'll usually post up, where there's like a patch of open seats, kind of on the third base side. Although I will say that, I really think some of the most underrated seats at Target Field are upper level behind home plate, because you got the spectacular skyline view and you're kind of right on top of the action, the pitching and the hitting right at home plate. So if there are games, which hopefully there will be yet this season, that are more full of fans than all of them other than opening day have been, that's kind of a good fallback. But and then on Friday, I'm actually taking the Twins offered, if you bought tickets to opening day, and I think even if you had Twins Pass, they gave people 4 free tickets for this Friday's game. So I'm going this Friday and taking our 2 young kids, and they're very, very excited about that. And we actually have pretty good seats for that game, which the free ones that they offered were like kind of over on the first baseline. So looking forward to that. But yeah, I mean, the Twins Pass, I think, is definitely the best deal in town for sports, because I think if you even, the math kind of works for if you even go to like 10 games, it pays for itself. And even though you only have standing room tickets, I mean, we've all seen from the TV broadcast, if you haven't been going to the games, you can see that there's a lot of good seats available. So typically you can kind of post up in pretty good seats and enjoy the game from, much, much closer than you might think that you would have to with standing room tickets.
Now, I doubt that Aaron's going to go there with his 2 young kids, but I am also a big fan of, I forget the name, but there's the bar on like the second level down the left field foul pole. So you sit along the third baseline, that you go to that bar, and if the game's not going well, the bar can help you out. If the game's going well, the bar can make it more fun. And then you can always they have a lot of great food at Target Field. They always mix it up, get some food as well. It's a great ballpark, no matter how good the team is.
Yeah, I think they changed the name of that bar on the left field line this year. I'm blanking on what it is, but one of the nice things there, especially with the games coming up where it looks like this weekend it's going to be in the 40s again, is that they have the heat lamps right there. So for opening day, we kind of posted up over there, and yeah, you're right close to the bar, which is great, obviously. But then in addition, you can get under the lamp and stay warm. So then they even play kind of like dance music on the PA out there. So, if you want something else besides just kind of like the silence of the baseball game, they play like kind of top 40 hits out there. So, it's a little more of a party vibe, depending on what you're in the mood for. It can be a good place to see a game for sure.
I just wanted a quick throw in there. I believe the new name of the bar is Carbless Clubhouse.
It's not surprising that you would know the name of the bar. Regardless, we are at the end of another week. That brings us to the minor league player of the week. This week, we've gone with 24-year-old right-handed pitcher Ty Langenberg. He's at Wichita. He pitched 7.2 innings over 2 games, allowed 1 run, 6 hits, walked just 1, and struck out 14 in 7.2 innings. He's a 2023 11th round pick out of the University of Iowa. He's not on anybody's top 30 prospect list, but he could be a reliever prospect at some point. There was a time a few years ago where he was at the back end of my top 30, but he's a guy to keep an eye on. He had a good week this week. After the break, we'll be back to take a look around the AL Central and preview the upcoming Boston series. Stick with us. And welcome back into Twins Takes here as we take a look around the recent series across the AL Central. The Chicago White Sox went 1-2 at Kansas City. They have 3 upcoming at home against the Tampa Bay Rays. Noah Schultz, a left-handed pitching prospect, the number 26 prospect in baseball per Baseball America, is making his MLB debut Tuesday, as well as infielder Sam Antonacci, who is a second baseman, I believe. So the White Sox calling some kids up early here, as the deadline for reaching a year of service time is now passed. That is relevant to the Twins as well, because Kalen Culpepper, Emmanuel Rodriguez, amongst others, that most certainly was impacting them. And then Kansas City went 2-1 against the White Sox. They head to Detroit for a 3-game AL Central showdown. The city of Kansas City proposed a $600 million stadium bond to keep the Royals in Missouri. Obviously, that's an ongoing dispute on where the new stadium will be built. The state of Missouri is obviously hoping to keep them in Missouri, while the state of Kansas is hoping to lure them over.
And if we travel across the state of Missouri to the east side, we go to St. Louis, where the Cleveland Guardians will be playing 3 games. They just went 1-2 in Atlanta, and they got throttled on Sunday Night Baseball last night. But they're sort of doing their Guardians thing. When they win close. When they lose by a lot. But Parker Messick, left-handed starter, young starter, who was, I believe, a top 5 prospect for them going into the year. He has a 0.51 ERA through his first 3 starts. Just a guy to keep an eye on. They always manage to have a young pitcher who's incredible, and Parker Messick looks to be the next one.
Yeah, and then it seems like the 4-game sweep at the hands of the Minnesota Twins kind of woke the Tigers up. They just finished a 3-game sweep against Miami. They'll be in Kansas City for the next 3. That Miami series, they just kind of controlled the whole series. I watched a couple of games on in the background, and I think their starting pitchers only were allowed 3 runs or their pitching staff as a whole only allowed 3 runs the entire series. So looks like the Tigers are going to start getting hot here. It's a good thing we caught them when we did.
Yeah, that was to be expected. We all knew last week when we previewed the Detroit series just how daunting that rotation looks on paper. So speaking of daunting pitching, the Twins tonight, game 1 at 6:40, there is a chance of rain, so a decent shot this one gets postponed and made up later in the week. Another stud lefty, Garrett Crochet, going tonight. He's 2-1, 3.12 ERA. On the mound for the Twins, right-handed pitcher Bailey Ober. He's 1-0, a 5.27 ERA. The question for this one is pretty simple. They hit Framber, they hit Tarek Skubal. Will they be able to hit another stud lefty for the 3rd time in less than a week? What do you guys think?
Until they prove they can, I'm going to say they can, right? Hope springs eternal, and we're 9-7. So let's go get Bailey Ober a win against Garrett Crochet. How's that sound?
We need to. I don't think the team posted the pitching duel graphic they did when it was Bradley versus Skubal, but we need the Ober versus Crochet pitching duel graphic, and we should be able to win.
A few years ago, this would have been a really intriguing matchup with Bailey Ober pitching at, 88, 89 miles an hour. It's not nearly as interesting. I don't have high hopes for this one, but maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe we'll get like 5 innings in and the Twins are up 2-1 and then they'll bang the game. That's maybe their best chance at winning this one. Game 2, another evening game, 6:40 first pitch. Right-handed pitcher Sonny Gray, 2-0, 2.76 ERA against the young right-hander Mick Abel. He's 0-2, a 6.08 ERA. This is the third start Sonny will be making against the Twins since he wore a Twins uniform. Just the second at Target Field. He's given up 7 runs in 11 innings against the Twins since he departed Minneapolis. How do you guys think the Twins will fare against an old friend?
I think Sonny is still pretty good. I know a lot of Twins fans sometimes want to say he's bad to make themselves feel better about letting him walk. He's still pretty solid, but the way they've been swinging the bat, I think that'll be a good game. Obviously, Abel's kind of the differentiator. If Abel pitches well, they can absolutely win that game. Like, he pitched great against that Tigers lineup. We'll see. With the Red Sox lineup was cold. They've started to heat up. It's going to be a tough one, but it's baseball. You never know.
Yeah, I think Abel is one of the big, if not the biggest, kind of swing player on the whole team, because, if he can live up to the upside that he's flashed, then all of a sudden you have a rotation with 4, pretty solid starting pitchers, and 2 who look elite in Ryan and Taj. And Bailey, I think kind of is what he is. I mean, his most recent start, I think he was 1 out away from at least getting a quality start. And, he's able to hang in there from time to time. And I don't think the Red Sox lineup is as fearsome as it once was. So, maybe he can kind of smoke and mirror his way through another solid start. But, he's the one guy that I would kind of exclude from the group of potentially really solid starters. But yeah, if Mick can be good this season, I think you can really see the contours there of a solid top to bottom starting rotation.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with Mick Abel. He's probably the X factor, certainly for the pitching staff and maybe for the team as a whole, for all the reasons that you mentioned. And then in the series finale, a 12:40 first pitch, another lefty on dock for the Twins, Connolly Early, who is a prospect. Has no decisions thus far, a 2.63 ERA going up against Simeon Woods Richardson, 0-2, a 4.60 ERA thus far. I have a thought just on the rotation as a whole. We see here for this series, Ober, Abel, and SWR back-to-back-to-back. I think that it'd be wise for the Twins to split these guys up and insert either Bradley or Ryan somewhere in between them, just because I think the odds that you get a short start out of 1, if not 2 of these guys is almost a guarantee. And we've seen how that can just tax your bullpen really, really hardly.
I agree. I actually thought Morris was going to be tasked with basically handcuffing like whichever one of those 3 goes the shortest. And then he pitched the Sunday game, so I guess he won't do that. But because like you said, you're going to be pretty fortunate if one of those 3 gives you a long start. You'd be thrilled if 2 of the 3 do. So yeah, I assume at some point you either split them up or you have Morris or one of those other AAA pitchers come in and, one of those games is just SWR does 5 innings, Morris does the other 4, and you let the rest of the bullpen rest.
Yeah, and I would just like to touch on Connolly Early a little bit. I know a lot of Twins fans were looking at him as a potential piece of the package if Mr. Joe Ryan got traded to the Red Sox, whether it was at the deadline last season or this last off season. So I'm kind of excited to see what he looks like. I know he's pretty highly touted prospect, and the Red Sox are super excited about him.
Yeah, he's not a household name yet at this point, but I think there's a pretty good chance by, if not at the end of this year, a few years from now, he's one of the better pitchers across the league as a whole. With that, it's now time to make our series predictions. I have the Twins at 1-2 in this one, assuming they get all 3 games in. I just think with tonight's matchup, Garrett Crochet, it's hard to predict a win there. And then the other 2 games, I kind of view them as toss-ups. The Red Sox maybe have the pitching advantage in all 3, but I think it's unlikely that they sweep them. The offense has been hot and cold up to this point.
I understand. I mean, I think that the Twins probably are, like you said, not really favored to win any of them, but the way they're playing baseball right now, going back home, they're in a good rhythm. I'm going to go 2-1, and Troy has 2-1 as well. That's probably not a smart idea, but You might as well ride the hot hand while it's hot.
Yeah, I'm going to stick at 1-2 like I did last series where I turned out to be wrong. Like Central said, the pitching matchups don't do it for me. We've got our 3 worst starters going, and 3 of Boston's better starters are going against us. So I think we'll lose Monday's game against Garrett Crochet, and then maybe split one of the next 2. So that's kind of what I'm looking to see. Maybe we'll get surprised and we'll win the last 2 games of the series, and we'll all go home happy. Aaron, do you have any predictions, whether they're season long or anything for us?
Yeah, I was thinking about that because, as I mentioned earlier, my prediction coming in was pretty bearish on the Twins. I mean, I had them 90-plus losses. Not really at this point ready to come off that quite yet, although there's a lot of confounding variables here where, like last year after the fire sale, obviously the team went into the tank. And then this year, if something like that was to happen again, where maybe a Ryan gets traded or a Buxton gets traded because let's say you're 10 games under 500 around the deadline, but you have some reinforcements who actually have some talent and, might not be, kind of as listless as the team was down the stretch last year. So, that being said, if they were 10 under and they traded a bunch of guys and brought up some of their prospects, I'm not totally sure that they would be, hugely worse off for that. But the thing I keep coming back to is I still don't really believe in this bullpen at all. And, it's amazing to consider that I don't think there's been a single game where the Twins have had a lead and they've turned it over to the bullpen and they've lost that game, which, given some of the, there's been a number of games where the bullpen has given up a bunch of runs, but the Twins have had such a big lead that it hasn't cost them the game. But, that's not going to continue to go on. And, Morris is a welcome addition, but I still think the back end of that bullpen, it's hard to have a lot of confidence in those guys to shut down close games. So, the lineup, like I said earlier, I think has a little more thump. Even Caratini seems to be kind of a nice pickup, and I like the way they've been using him at first base and then catching to spell Jeffers. Josh Bell has obviously been excellent. So there's a little more length to the lineup than I thought. And actually the defense, after early in the year looking absolutely miserable, in recent games with that one Wallner play that came up earlier being the exception, has been pretty solid. So, I think there's some reasons to be a little bit more optimistic, but I still, when I look at this objectively, think that we're kind of seeing a small sample size theater here with them being 9-7. I don't expect that pace to continue. So I'd still kind of peg them around, 90-ish losses for this season, but I would very much love to be wrong about that because there's nothing more fun than, seeing meaningful baseball in the summertime. And I really hope that we're in for that this year, that the Twins can remain relevant, into the fall. I'm not necessarily expecting that, but then again, I didn't expect them to start this well either. So hopefully they'll continue to pleasantly surprise.
Well, I just want to add on to that. It's not quite this time yet, but if they keep playing competitive baseball for maybe another month or 2, we're going to have to start talking about possible buying trades, not selling trades. But this was really good. This was really fun. For those who want to see more of Aaron, there was a really interesting, really in-depth piece published about his day-to-day work and life in the Times of London last week. And Aaron, where else can our audience find your work and follow along?
Yeah, thanks to you guys for having me. It's been really fun to talk some Twins baseball and kind of take a break from the more political topics I deal with day to day. But you can find me at @Rupar on Twitter, at Blue Sky. I am atrupar.com. And then if you want to read kind of my longer form writings and more in-depth coverage, my newsletter is called Public Notice. You can find that at publicnotice.co. And if you want to see my Twins takes, look in my replies on X, because I try not to post too many sports thoughts on Maine. That's one of those things where people will get kind of confused or sometimes even upset if I tweet about sports, especially Minnesota sports, which is pretty niche, and especially the Twins, which don't have as much of a national presence as the Wolves or Vikings do at this point. But I'm bantering with some of the beat writers in the replies, and then of course you guys as well. So if you want to see what I have to think about the Twins, check it out there. And don't get mad at me if I'm too negative, because I kind of vent on there sometimes too. But really appreciate you guys having me on, and hopefully have a chance to do it again down the line too.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. This is really great to have this conversation with you. As always, having people that aren't always on this podcast, it's good to get a different point of view. Be sure to follow Aaron wherever you'd like, support his work. We'll be sure to link all those ways you can reach him or support him in the description of this episode. We'll be back Thursday recapping the Boston series. Make sure to like and subscribe as always, as it does help the podcast grow. You can follow on Twitter at Twins Takes Pod. I did release a short episode, which I plan on doing going forward when the Twins make a roster move, or if anything big happens, I release something when the Royce and Cody Lawyerson injury happens. So make sure to follow there if you want to keep up to date with those. Again, thanks to Aaron for joining, as always, for Falvey's Mattress and Twins Insider with special guest Aaron Rupar. I'm Twins Central on Twins Takes. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.